Imagine, if you will, the unassuming act of selecting a pair of bowling shoes from a rack at your local alley. A seemingly simple transaction, perhaps, a routine prelude to an evening of pins and camaraderie. Yet, beneath the ordinary appearance of that borrowed footwear lies a meticulously engineered history, a saga of material science, subtle friction, and the tireless pursuit of a perfect glide or a precise halt. For decades, manufacturers, scientists, and governing bodies quietly refined the very composition of those soles, debating the nuances of felt, leather, and rubber, all to dictate the precise interaction between foot and approach. But how did this seemingly mundane object evolve from crude beginnings into a complex, standardized component, crucial for both amateur enjoyment and competitive precision? To truly understand its significance, we need to examine its origins and the painstaking journey of its materials. Before the widespread popularization of recreational bowling in the United States, particularly as it began to gain traction in the early decades of the 20th century, the concept of a dedicated bowling shoe was, by and large, nascent. Early bowling, often found in private clubs, taverns, or rudimentary public alleys, did not always necessitate specialized footwear. Participants might have simply worn their street shoes, or perhaps a pair of more comfortable, often canvas or soft leather shoes, if they possessed them. The approaches themselves were typically constructed from sturdy, polished wood, requiring some degree of care to maintain their integrity and to prevent unnecessary damage from street shoes. The primary concern in these early days was less about standardized slip resistance and more about general comfort, the protection of the lane approach, and a modicum of personal safety. Street shoes, with their varying sole materials ranging from hard leather to rudimentary rubber compounds, presented an inconsistent interface with the wooden approach. A hard leather sole might slide too much, offering insufficient grip for a controlled delivery, while a sticky rubber sole might cause an abrupt stop, leading to falls or injury. Furthermore, street shoes often carried in dirt, pebbles, or moisture from outside, which could mar the pristine surface of the bowling approach, altering its playability for subsequent bowlers and increasing maintenance requirements. As bowling leagues and recreational play began to formalize and expand in the 1920s and early 1930s, the need for a specific type of footwear became increasingly apparent. Proprietors of bowling establishments recognized that providing a uniform shoe could protect their investments in the lanes and approaches, while also offering a more consistent experience for their patrons. This period saw the informal emergence of what might be considered the very first specialized bowling shoes. These were often simple, low-cost canvas or leather shoes, perhaps with a basic leather sole or a soft, thin rubber sole. The key distinction was that they were worn exclusively indoors, preventing the tracking of external debris onto the playing surface. However, even with these early dedicated shoes, the science of sole composition was largely undeveloped. Manufacturers, often general shoe companies rather than specialists in athletic footwear, experimented with readily available materials. Split leather, often from the less durable layers of hides, was common for soles due to its low cost and inherent slipperiness on a wooden surface, allowing for a degree of slide. Some shoes might feature a full leather sole for both feet, while others began to differentiate, perhaps using a slightly stickier material for the push-off foot and a smoother material for the slide foot. This differentiation, though rudimentary, planted the seed for the sophisticated asymmetrical sole designs that would become standard in later decades. The concept of a slip resistance rating was entirely absent. Any assessment of a shoe's performance was purely subjective, based on the feel and experience of individual bowlers. There were no established metrics, no universal tests, and certainly no standardized materials. The bowling shoe was a functional item, not yet a precision instrument. The decade of the 1930s marked a pivotal period in American recreational bowling. Despite the economic hardships of the Great Depression, bowling offered an affordable and accessible form of entertainment and social interaction. Its popularity soared, leading to the construction of numerous new bowling centers and the expansion of existing ones. This growth created a distinct market for specialized bowling equipment, including footwear. It was during this time that bowling shoes began to evolve from generic indoor footwear into purpose-built instruments, albeit ones still largely driven by trial and error in material selection. Manufacturers, now recognizing the emerging niche, started to focus more intently on the specific requirements of the bowling approach. The fundamental dilemma revolved around achieving the delicate balance between slide and grip. The delivery of a bowling ball requires a smooth, controlled slide on one foot, typically the left foot for a right-handed bowler, or the right foot for a left-handed bowler, followed by a firm plant and push-off from the other foot. If the slide foot encountered too much friction, the bowler's momentum would be abruptly halted, disrupting balance and accuracy, potentially leading to falls. Conversely, if the push-off foot lacked sufficient grip, it could slip, preventing a powerful and stable release. Early sole materials in the 1930s were primarily natural in origin, reflecting the available technologies and manufacturing capabilities of the era. Leather, in various grades and finishes, was a dominant choice. Split leather, as mentioned, offered a relatively smooth, low-friction surface, making it suitable for the slide foot. Its properties could be subtly altered by sanding, buffing, or even through the application of powders by bowlers themselves, though this was an individual practice rather than a manufacturer-driven specification. Full-grain leather, being tougher and often possessing a slightly higher coefficient of friction, might be used for the push-off foot, though its grip was still quite limited compared to later rubber compounds. Felt was another material that found its way onto early bowling shoe soles, particularly for the slide foot. Wool felt, being soft and somewhat slippery on a wooden approach, provided a smooth glide. It also had the advantage of being less prone to marking the approach than some harder leathers or rubber compounds. However, felt had its own limitations. It was susceptible to wear, especially at the toe, and could pick up dirt, dust, or moisture from the approach, which would significantly alter its sliding characteristics. A damp felt sole could become quite sticky, leading to unexpected halts and potential injuries. Conversely, excessively dry or dusty felt could become too slippery for the push-off foot. If differentiation was applied, early rubber compounds were explored. These were generally basic natural rubber formulations, often black, which provided significantly more grip than leather or felt. However, these early rubber soles were often relatively hard, sometimes lacked sufficient flexibility, and could leave unsightly black scuff marks on the light-colored wooden approaches, much to the chagrin of alley proprietors. The exact composition of these rubber compounds was largely proprietary to individual shoe manufacturers, with no industry-wide agreement on formulations or performance metrics. The concept of a standardized slip resistance rating was still decades away. Each manufacturer pursued its own internal methods of assessing material performance, which were often qualitative and based on anecdotal feedback from bowlers or internal testing. There was no common language or universal scale to describe how slippery a slide sole was or how grippy a push-off sole performed. Bowlers simply chose shoes based on feel, brand reputation, or price. The consistency of performance across different pairs of shoes, even from the same manufacturer, could vary depending on batch variations in raw materials and manufacturing processes. The bowling shoe of the 1930s was a product of earnest effort and material experimentation, laying the groundwork for the more scientific approaches that would follow. The 1940s presented a complex landscape for the burgeoning bowling shoe industry. The early part of the decade was dominated by the material shortages and industrial redirection necessitated by World War II. Resources critical for civilian manufacturing, such as rubber, certain leathers, and chemicals used in tanning or synthetic material production, were diverted to the war effort. This forced bowling shoe manufacturers, like many other industries, to adapt rapidly. During the war years, manufacturers faced significant challenges in procuring consistent supplies of materials. This often meant relying on alternative or lower-grade materials for shoe soles. For slide soles, exotic or high-quality leathers became scarce, leading to the use of more common, less refined leathers or even substitutes. Felt, particularly wool felt, also faced supply chain disruptions as wool was prioritized for military uniforms and other essential goods. This era often saw a reduction in the overall quality and consistency of bowling shoe soles. The emphasis shifted from optimizing performance to simply providing a functional shoe. Rubber, a critical component for push-off soles, was particularly impacted. Natural rubber sources, largely in Southeast Asia, were cut off by the conflict, leading to a desperate need for synthetic alternatives. While synthetic rubber development accelerated during the war, the initial focus was on military applications like tires, hoses, and seals. Any synthetic rubber available for consumer goods might have been less refined or available in limited quantities, impacting the grip and durability of bowling shoe breaking soles. This period was characterized by improvisation and a general stagnation in the advancement of sole material composition. The very notion of establishing slip-resistant standards was put on hold as the industry focused on mere survival and production under duress. However, the latter half of the 1940s brought a dramatic shift. With the cessation of hostilities and the subsequent post-war economic boom, Americans embraced leisure activities with renewed vigor. Bowling, having provided a sense of community and distraction during difficult times, exploded in popularity. Millions of returning servicemen and a rapidly growing middle class sought affordable entertainment, and bowling alleys became vibrant social centers across the nation. This surge in demand for bowling led directly to an increased need for bowling shoes. Manufacturers, now with greater access to raw materials and a re-energized industrial base, began to ramp up production. The experience of wartime shortages, ironically, sometimes spurred innovation in material science, as chemists and engineers had been forced to explore synthetic alternatives. While full standardization was still a distant concept, the post-war era saw a renewed focus on improving the consistency and performance of sole materials. Leather continued to be a staple for slide soles, with manufacturers able to procure better grades. The properties of different leathers, their grain, flexibility, and natural oils, were increasingly understood and selected for specific applications. Felt also made a strong comeback for slide soles, often with improved manufacturing processes that yielded more consistent density and wear characteristics. For push-off soles, the synthetic rubber compounds developed during the war began to find their way into consumer products. These early synthetic rubbers, such as styrene butadiene rubber, SBR, offered promising alternatives to natural rubber, often with improved durability and consistent grip characteristics. The foundational principle of the asymmetric sole, a slide sole on one foot and a grip sole on the other, became more firmly established as manufacturers catered to the specific needs of right-handed and left-handed bowlers. While formal slip resistance ratings were still not in place, manufacturers began to develop internal benchmarks. They relied on feedback from professional bowlers, bowling instructors, and league players to refine their material choices and construction techniques. The consistency of a shoe's performance, while still variable, became a more significant selling point. The seeds of standardization were beginning to germinate, driven by a growing, discerning market and a revived industrial capacity. The stage was set for the rapid advancements of the 1950s. The 1950s are often referred to as the golden age of bowling in America. With an unprecedented surge in popularity, bowling became a quintessential American pastime. Bowling centers, often lavish and equipped with automatic pinsettas, became ubiquitous community hubs. This era witnessed a massive expansion in league play, television coverage of bowling tournaments, and a significant increase in both recreational and competitive bowlers. This explosion in participation put immense pressure on bowling shoe manufacturers to produce footwear that met the increasingly diverse demands of the market. The increased number of bowlers, ranging from casual weekly players to serious league competitors, highlighted the growing problem of inconsistent shoe performance. A bowler might rent shoes at one alley and find them perfectly suited, only to struggle with a different pair at another location. Even within a purchased pair, the long-term consistency of the sole's performance could be unpredictable. This variability was not just an annoyance. It could impact a bowler's game, frustrate proprietors, and even pose safety risks due to unexpected changes in slide or grip. This decade saw a significant push towards material diversification and a more deliberate approach to sole composition. Alongside traditional leather and felt, new synthetic materials began to be integrated, offering properties that natural materials often lacked in terms of consistency, durability, and controlled friction. For the slide sole, leather remained a primary choice, but manufacturers started experimenting more with specific tanning processes and finishes to achieve a consistent glide. Split leather continued to be popular for its inherent smoothness, but chrome-tanned leather, known for its uniform texture and strength, gained prominence. Deerskin, with its soft, supple texture and consistent sliding properties, also emerged as a premium option for specialized slide soles. The challenge with leather was its variability as a natural product. Even within the same hide, characteristics could differ. Maintaining consistency required careful selection and processing. Felt, particularly synthetic felt, began to offer a viable alternative to wool felt. Synthetic fibers, such as those derived from nylon or polyester, could be engineered with more consistent fiber lengths, densities, and orientations. This allowed manufacturers to produce felt soles with predictable sliding coefficients and improved wear resistance compared to their natural counterparts. These synthetic felts were also less susceptible to moisture absorption, a critical advantage on potentially damp approaches. The breaking sole, or push-off sole, saw even more significant advancements with the increasing availability and sophistication of synthetic rubbers. Styrene butadiene rubber, SBR, refined after its wartime development, became a standard material due to its excellent abrasion resistance, consistent grip, and relatively low cost. Manufacturers also began to experiment with different rubber compounds, varying the proportion of polymers, fillers like carbon black, and additives to fine-tune properties such as hardness, measured in Shore-A durometer, tackiness, and durability. The goal was to create a sole that provided a firm, non-slip grip without leaving excessive marks on the approach. Gum rubber, a softer, more pliable natural rubber formulation, was sometimes used for its exceptional grip and flexibility, though it could be less durable and more prone to marking. The burgeoning popularity of bowling and the growing frustration with inconsistent equipment performance led to the first serious discussions about the need for standardized equipment within governing bodies like the American Bowling Congress and the Women's International Bowling Congress. While formal slip resistance ratings were not yet established, the concept of developing uniform specifications for shoe soles began to be debated. These organizations, responsible for maintaining the integrity of the sport, recognized that equipment consistency was crucial for fair competition and player safety. Manufacturers, through industry associations or independent research and development, started to investigate more scientific ways to measure a sole's performance. Simple drag tests, where a shoe was pulled across a sample approach surface under a controlled weight, began to be employed. While not yet yielding universally recognized ratings, these internal tests provided valuable data for material selection and product development. The focus shifted from merely slippery or grippy to understanding how slippery or how grippy a material was under controlled conditions. This empirical approach was a crucial step towards the eventual standardization of slip resistance. The 1950s laid the groundwork, transforming the bowling shoe from a general piece of footwear into an increasingly engineered component of the sport. The 1960s marked a significant leap forward in the science and standardization of bowling shoe sole materials and slip resistance. Building upon the groundwork of the previous decades, this period saw a concerted effort to move beyond subjective assessments and anecdotal feedback towards measurable, quantifiable standards. The continued growth of bowling, coupled with an increased professionalism in both competitive play and equipment manufacturing, necessitated a more rigorous approach. The critical challenge was to define and measure slip resistance in a consistent manner. What constituted an ideal slide, and what characterized adequate grip? These questions drove the development of early testing methodologies. While highly sophisticated tribometers, devices designed to measure friction, were still primarily laboratory tools, simpler, yet more controlled, tests began to be implemented by manufacturers and potentially by equipment committees within organizations like the American Bowling Congress and the Women's International Bowling Congress. One common approach involved measuring the coefficient of friction. The coefficient of friction is a dimensionless scalar value that describes the ratio of the force of friction between two bodies and the force pressing them together. A lower COF indicates less friction, meaning more slip, while a higher COF indicates more friction, meaning more grip. For bowling, two types are particularly relevant: static coefficient of friction, which is the force required to initiate motion, and kinetic coefficient of friction, which is the force required to maintain motion. Early tests might involve a weighted sled fitted with a shoe sole sample, pulled across a representative lane approach material, often a section of maple or pine wood, using a spring scale or a more advanced force gauge. The force required to move the sled, divided by the weight of the sled, yielded a raw COF value. While these tests were rudimentary compared to modern standards, they provided a crucial framework for comparing different materials objectively. The development of specific COF targets began to emerge. For the slide sole, manufacturers aimed for a material with a low and consistent kinetic COF, typically in a range that allowed for a smooth, controlled glide without abrupt stops. For the push-off sole, a higher static and kinetic COF was desired to provide reliable grip and stability. These target ranges were not necessarily published as official ratings for consumers, but guided internal research and development. Material science continued its rapid evolution in the 1960s. For the slide sole, a wider array of options became available. Split leather continued to be a workhorse for its low cost and natural sliding properties. Manufacturers began to refine tanning and finishing techniques to enhance consistency and durability. The grain side or the flesh side might be used depending on the desired slipperiness. Chrome-tanned leather gained further popularity. Its uniform structure and improved resistance to wear and moisture made it a superior choice for many mid-range to high-end shoes. The method of tanning, using chromium salts, created a leather with distinct performance characteristics, often a smoother, more consistent glide than vegetable-tanned leathers. Deerskin maintained its status as a premium material. Its incredibly soft, supple, and consistent texture provided an excellent, predictable slide, often preferred by professional bowlers who sought maximum feel and control. Its primary drawbacks were cost and durability compared to harder leathers. Felt, both wool and synthetic, was still in use, but synthetic felts made from polyester, nylon, or blends became increasingly sophisticated. These synthetic felts could be engineered for specific densities and fiber orientations, offering more predictable and durable sliding characteristics than their natural counterparts. They were also less susceptible to moisture absorption, which was a significant advantage in varying bowling alley environments. The manufacturing process of felts, involving interlocking fibers through heat, moisture, and pressure, allowed for precise control over the material's properties. Microfiber materials, while not yet as prevalent as they would become in later decades, the precursors to modern microfiber materials began to be explored. These engineered fabrics, designed for specific frictional properties, represented a step towards advanced synthetic solutions. For the push-off sole, rubber compounds saw continuous refinement. Gum rubber remained a popular choice for its high natural tackiness and flexibility, offering excellent initial grip. However, its relatively soft nature meant it could wear down faster and was more prone to marking lighter surfaces. Styrene butadiene rubber, SBR, became the industry standard for braking soles. Its blend of good abrasion resistance, consistent grip, and moderate cost made it highly versatile. Manufacturers varied the carbon black content, vulcanization processes, and other additives to adjust hardness, wear characteristics, and COF. Butyl rubber was occasionally used for its very high dampening properties and excellent grip, particularly on slightly oily or damp surfaces. However, it was generally more expensive and sometimes less abrasion resistant than SBR. Polyurethane, towards the latter half of the 1960s, began to emerge as a promising material. Its versatility allowed for formulation into compounds with a wide range of hardness, elasticity, and grip characteristics. Polyurethane offered superior wear resistance and could be formulated to be non-marking, addressing a key concern for alley proprietors. The challenge of varying lane conditions became more apparent in the 1960s. Lane oil patterns, the type of wood used in the approach, whether maple versus pine, and environmental factors like humidity could all significantly impact how a shoe sole performed. While a perfectly consistent shoe was the goal, the reality of variable playing conditions meant that bowlers often had to adjust their technique or even carry different shoes or sole treatments. This highlighted the need for shoes that offered a predictable response, even if that response varied slightly with conditions. The increasing professionalization of bowling also meant that professional bowlers played a greater role in influencing shoe design and material choices. Their demand for precision, consistency, and durability directly informed manufacturers' research and development efforts. While explicit slip resistance ratings for consumers were still not standardized across the industry, and certainly not universally published in an easily comparable format, the underlying scientific understanding of friction and material properties was rapidly advancing, laying the critical groundwork for the more formal systems of the following decades. The 1960s transformed the bowling shoe from a functional item into a piece of finely tuned athletic equipment, driven by science and the growing demands of a sophisticated sport. The 1970s built upon the scientific foundation established in the 1960s, witnessing a further refinement of sole materials, more sophisticated measurement techniques for slip resistance, and a growing, albeit still internal, awareness of the coefficient of friction as a key performance metric. The bowling industry continued to thrive, and competitive play became even more intense, driving demand for equipment that offered maximum precision and consistency. One of the most significant trends in the 1970s was the continued dominance and diversification of synthetic materials for both slide and breaking soles. While traditional leather and felt still held their place, particularly in certain niches, the advantages of engineered polymers in terms of consistency, durability, and tailorability became undeniable. For the slide sole, the focus was on achieving a consistent and predictable glide across a wider range of approach conditions. Advanced synthetic felts became increasingly sophisticated. Manufacturers developed proprietary blends of synthetic fibers, such as polyester, nylon, and polypropylene, to create felt soles that offered specific COF values. These felts were often treated to resist moisture absorption and lint accumulation, addressing two common problems that could unpredictably alter slide characteristics. The manufacturing process for these felts allowed for precise control over fiber density and weave, leading to superior consistency from batch to batch. Microfiber materials, although not yet universally adopted, the research and development into advanced microfiber materials continued to progress. These materials, often composed of extremely fine synthetic fibers, offered exceptional smoothness and consistent sliding properties. Their ability to shed debris and resist moisture absorption was a significant advantage, particularly for bowlers seeking a very clean and predictable slide. Specially treated leathers. Leather, while a natural product, also saw advancements. Tanning processes became more controlled, and specific finishes or coatings were sometimes applied to leather soles to enhance their uniformity and reduce their variability. The aim was to make leather perform more predictably, akin to synthetic alternatives. For the breaking sole, the emphasis remained on superior grip, durability, and non-marking properties. High-performance rubber compounds, styrene butadiene rubber, continued to be the workhorse, but manufacturers developed proprietary blends, often incorporating other synthetic rubbers or specialized fillers. The Shore, a durometer hardness, a measure of material hardness and therefore grip, became a critical specification. Manufacturers aimed for compounds that were hard enough to be durable, but soft enough to provide ample grip through deformation and adhesion to the approach surface. Polyurethane compounds truly came into its own during the 1970s as a premium material for breaking soles. Its incredible versatility allowed for formulations with a wide range of mechanical properties. Polyurethane soles could be engineered to be highly abrasion-resistant, extremely grippy, and consistently non-marking. Their superior performance often justified their higher cost, making them a popular choice for serious league and professional bowlers. Dual-density soles. An innovation that began to appear in the 1970s was the concept of dual-density soles for the braking foot. This involved combining two layers of rubber or polyurethane with different hardness values. A softer, tackier layer on the surface would provide initial grip, while a harder, more durable layer beneath would offer support and extend the shoe's lifespan. This allowed for optimized performance across different phases of the push-off. The measurement of slip resistance became more refined. While universal, publicly accessible ratings, comparable to those for other consumer products, were still not fully formalized by an external body, manufacturers internally used more precise instruments and methodologies. Tribometers, laboratory-grade tribometers, capable of measuring both static and kinetic COF under controlled loads and speeds, became more accessible. These devices could simulate the interaction between a shoe sole and various approach surfaces, including different types of wood and, increasingly, synthetic approach materials, which began to gain traction in the late 1970s. Controlled environment testing. Manufacturers began conducting tests in controlled environments, varying factors like temperature, humidity, and the presence of microcontaminants such as dust and oil residue to understand how these elements affected sole performance. This helped in designing materials that were more robust to environmental variations. The impact of changing lane materials was a growing concern. As synthetic approach materials like laminated plastics and specialized composites started to be introduced as alternatives to traditional wooden approaches, shoe sole materials needed to adapt. The COF characteristics of a sole could differ significantly on a wood approach versus a synthetic one. This added another layer of complexity to material selection and the goal of universal consistency. Consumer awareness of shoe performance also began to increase, albeit often through the lens of brand reputation and professional endorsements. Serious bowlers started to pay more attention to the specific materials used in their shoes, and discussions about the feel of different soles became more common in pro shops and among league players. While there wasn't a universal slip rating sticker on every shoebox, the underlying scientific principles were quietly shaping product development. The 1970s marked a period of robust growth and internal scientific advancement in bowling shoe technology, setting the stage for the highly specialized and refined products of the 1980s. The 1980s represent a zenith in the evolution of standardized bowling shoe sole material composition and slip resistance ratings within the time frame of this discussion, 1930 to 1990. By this decade, the understanding of tribology, the science of friction, lubrication, and wear, as it applied to bowling shoes, had become significantly advanced. Manufacturers, driven by both competitive pressure and the increasingly discerning demands of bowlers, invested heavily in material science and engineering. The concept of the coefficient of friction moved from an internal laboratory metric to a more explicitly understood, though not always universally published, performance indicator. Synthetic materials came to dominate the market, pushing the boundaries of performance and consistency. While natural leather and felt still had their advocates, particularly for traditionalists or those seeking a very specific feel, engineered polymers and composites offered unparalleled control over material properties. For the slide sole, the goal was to achieve an ultra-consistent, low COF that allowed for a smooth, uninterrupted slide, regardless of the bowler's weight, speed, or the condition of the approach. Advanced microfiber composites became increasingly sophisticated and prevalent. Microfiber soles were often engineered with complex weaves and sometimes treated with specific polymers or coatings to achieve precise COF values. They offered superior resistance to moisture, dirt, and lint accumulation compared to traditional felts or even leathers. Their key advantage was their extreme consistency, providing a predictable slide shot after shot, an invaluable trait for competitive bowlers. Proprietary synthetic felt blends. Manufacturers developed their own secret recipes for synthetic felts, blending various polymers, for example polyester, nylon, and PTFE, in specific ratios and densities. These custom felts were designed to optimize durability, maintain consistent COF over time, and resist compaction. Specialized leather treatments. Even leather slide soles saw advancements. Leather was often treated with specific tanning agents and surface coatings to reduce its natural variability, improve its wear resistance, and provide a more consistent COF. Some premium leather soles were painstakingly selected and finished to provide a specific feel that some bowlers preferred over synthetics. For the breaking sole, the emphasis was on achieving instantaneous, reliable, and consistent grip, coupled with exceptional durability and non-marking properties, high-performance polyurethane and rubber blends. Polyurethane became the material of choice for top-tier breaking soles. Its chemical versatility allowed manufacturers to formulate compounds with precise durometer hardness, elasticity, and surface tackiness. Blends of polyurethane with specialized synthetic rubbers like SBR or nitrile rubber were developed to combine the best properties of each, such as enhanced grip on oily surfaces, superior abrasion resistance, and consistent performance across temperature variations. Multi-density and layered soles. The concept of multi-density soles, briefly explored in the 1970s, became more refined. This involved layering different compounds. For example, a softer, tackier compound on the outermost surface for maximum initial grip, backed by a harder, more resilient compound for structural integrity and longevity. Some designs even incorporated different compounds in specific zones of the sole to optimize grip during different phases of the push-off. Tread patterns and surface textures. While bowling shoe soles are generally smooth to maximize surface contact, subtle microtread patterns or specialized surface textures were sometimes incorporated into breaking soles to enhance grip, especially on slightly dusty or contaminated approaches, by providing channels for debris displacement. The standardization of slip resistance ratings, while still primarily internal to manufacturers or guided by informal industry consensus, became much more rigorous and scientifically driven. The American Bowling Congress and Women's International Bowling Congress played a crucial role in advocating for consistency and quality, although official, universally adopted slip resistance numbers for consumers were not yet mandated. Instead, the standards focused on performance characteristics, quantitative COF measurement. Laboratory testing using advanced tribometers became standard practice for leading manufacturers. These instruments could measure both static and kinetic COF under various conditions, including simulated lane oil, different approach materials, whether wood, synthetic laminates, or tile, and varying loads. Manufacturers aimed for specific COF ranges for their slide soles, typically very low, around 0.15-0.25 kinetic COF on dry surfaces, and their breaking soles, much higher, around 0.7-0.90 static COF. Durability and wear testing. In addition to slip resistance, durability became a key aspect of standardization. Materials were subjected to accelerated wear tests, simulating thousands of approaches to ensure they maintained their COF characteristics over the shoe's lifespan. This included abrasion resistance testing, where soles were rubbed against abrasive surfaces under controlled pressure. Consistency across batches. With the reliance on synthetic materials and advanced manufacturing processes, quality control measures were intensified to ensure consistency from one production batch to the next. This involved strict specifications for raw materials, precise mixing ratios for polymer compounds, and rigorous testing of finished soles. Statistical process control techniques were increasingly employed to monitor and maintain quality. The evolution of lane approaches from natural wood to synthetic materials throughout the 1980s further complicated shoe sole design. Synthetic approaches, often made of specialized laminated plastics or composite materials, offered different frictional properties and reacted differently to lane oil and cleaning agents than wood. This required manufacturers to develop sole materials that performed optimally and consistently on both types of surfaces, or to offer specialized soles for different lane conditions. The influence of professional bowlers on shoe design and material choices was profound. These athletes, striving for marginal gains, demanded absolute precision and consistency from their footwear. Their feedback often guided the development of new materials and designs, leading to the introduction of premium shoes with highly specified sole compositions. Manufacturers also began to brand their unique sole materials, creating a perception of proprietary technology and superior performance. While a casual bowler might not have been aware of the precise COF of their rental shoes, the overall improvement in shoe performance, durability, and consistency across the board was a direct result of these scientific and standardization efforts. The 1980s solidified the bowling shoe's status as a highly engineered piece of athletic equipment, where the unseen history of sole material composition and slip resistance ratings culminated in a refined and predictable interaction between the bowler and the approach, a fundamental element of the sport's continued success and evolution. To truly appreciate the meticulous history of bowling shoe sole materials and slip resistance, it is crucial to delve deeper into the unseen nuances of how these materials interact with the bowling approach. The performance of a bowling shoe is not merely a function of its sole material in isolation. It's a dynamic interplay governed by principles of tribology, surface chemistry, and environmental factors. Understanding these microscopic and macro-level interactions illuminates why manufacturers pursued specific material compositions and why standardization became so critical. At the heart of slip resistance is friction, which is generally understood as the force that opposes motion between two surfaces in contact. In bowling, we are concerned with both static friction, the force required to initiate motion, crucial for the push-off foot, and kinetic friction, the force opposing motion once it has started, critical for the slide foot. The coefficient of friction quantifies this interaction. For the slide sole, the goal is a low and consistent kinetic COF. This means the material must glide smoothly without sticking or grabbing at any point during the approach. Materials like leather, felt, and later microfibers achieve this through different mechanisms. Leather, particularly split leather or chrome-tanned varieties, possesses a relatively smooth, consistent surface. On a wooden or synthetic approach, the leather fibers and surface oils interact in a way that minimizes adhesion and interlocking. The microscopic irregularities of the leather and the approach surface create minute contact points. A smooth slide occurs when these contact points deform easily, or when a thin film of lubricant, like approach wax or even microscopic dust, helps to reduce direct surface-to-surface interaction. The challenge with leather was its natural variability. Different batches of leather, or even different parts of the same hide, could have slightly different fiber structures, pore sizes, and oil content, leading to inconsistent slide characteristics. This is precisely why meticulous selection and tanning processes became so important in the 1960s and 70s. Felt, whether wool or synthetic, functions differently. It is composed of a dense matrix of intertwined fibers. When a felt sole slides, these fibers can deform and compress, creating a smooth contact area. The open structure of felt also allows it to capture small particles of dust or debris rather than accumulating them on the contact surface, which might otherwise alter friction. However, felt's Achilles heel was its susceptibility to moisture. Water acts as a powerful lubricant, or paradoxically, can cause materials to stick, depending on the surface tension and the material's porosity. A damp felt sole, by absorbing moisture, could dramatically increase its COF, leading to an abrupt, unexpected halt. This vulnerability drove the development of synthetic felts in the 1960s and 70s, engineered with hydrophobic fibers and tighter constructions to resist moisture absorption. Microfiber materials, emerging strongly in the 1980s, represented a pinnacle in slide sole technology. These materials are composed of incredibly fine synthetic fibers, often much thinner than a human hair, woven or felted into a highly uniform structure. The extremely small diameter of these fibers and their consistent arrangement create an exceptionally smooth and consistent contact surface. They offer very low adhesion and interlocking with the approach surface, resulting in a highly predictable, low kinetic COF. Furthermore, their synthetic nature makes them highly resistant to moisture absorption and less prone to collecting debris, further contributing to their consistent performance. Their internal structure is designed to minimize the effect of surface-surface irregularities on the approach, effectively smoothing out the interaction. For the breaking sole, the objective is a high and consistent static and kinetic COF. This requires materials that can maximize adhesion and interlocking with the approach surface. Rubber compounds, particularly SBR and polyurethane, excel here. Rubber's inherent elasticity and viscoelastic properties are key. When a rubber sole contacts the approach, it deforms microscopically, conforming to the contours and irregularities of the surface. This increases the actual contact area and allows for strong intermolecular forces, adhesion, to develop between the rubber and the approach. Additionally, the microscopic roughness of the rubber itself, often enhanced by the inclusion of fillers like carbon black, contributes to mechanical interlocking with the approach. The hardness of the rubber, measured in Shore-A durometer, is a critical parameter. A softer rubber, a lower durometer, will deform more readily, increasing contact area and adhesion, thus providing more grip. However, it will also be less durable and more prone to wear. A harder rubber, a higher durometer, will be more durable but may offer less grip on smoother surfaces. Manufacturers in the 1970s and 80s meticulously balanced these properties, using specific polymer blends, vulcanization processes, and filler content to achieve the desired COF, durability, and non-marking characteristics. Carbon black, for instance, is not just a filler. It enhances the rubber's strength, abrasion resistance, and provides a specific level of tackiness. Polyurethane, as it matured in the 1970s and 80s, offered even greater flexibility in tailoring these properties. Polyurethane elastomers can be formulated to exhibit a wide range of hardness, elasticity, and surface energies, allowing for precise control over their frictional behavior. They could be made highly resistant to abrasion, making them incredibly durable, while simultaneously formulated to provide excellent grip through their unique viscoelastic response to pressure. This allowed for the development of braking soles that offered consistent, powerful stopping power without rapid degradation. The challenge of slip resistance ratings was not just about measuring the COF of a material, but about ensuring that this COF remained consistent under a variety of real-world bowling conditions. Factors like approach, material, the type of wood, whether maple, pine, or a combination, or synthetic laminate used for the approach has its own surface energy, hardness, and texture, all of which influence the COF. Lane oil. While the approach is generally not oiled, residue from bowlers' hands or from the lane itself can be tracked onto the approach. Small amounts of oil can drastically alter the COF of a sole. Dust and debris. Microscopic dust, lint, and other debris from the environment or from previous shoes can accumulate on the approach, forming a third body layer that affects friction. Humidity and temperature. These environmental factors can affect the properties of both the shoe sole, for example, how readily felt absorbs moisture, how rubber's elasticity changes with temperature, and the approach surface. Bowler technique and weight. The angle of approach, the force applied, and the bowler's weight all influence the pressure exerted on the sole, which in turn can affect the COF. Given these variables, the drive for standardization in the 1980s was not to find a single perfect COF number, but to ensure that shoe manufacturers could reliably produce soles that delivered predictable performance within a known range under a defined set of conditions. This predictability was paramount for competitive fairness and bowler safety. Testing protocols therefore had to account for these environmental and operational variables, moving beyond simple dry COF measurements to more comprehensive evaluations. The unseen world of molecular bonds, fiber structures, and surface topography dictated the performance characteristics, transforming a simple piece of footwear into a sophisticated tool for athletic endeavor. Beyond the purely scientific and performance-driven aspects, the evolution of bowling shoe sole materials and slip resistance ratings was deeply intertwined with the economic and manufacturing realities of the American bowling industry from 1930 to 1990. The choices made by manufacturers regarding materials, processes, and standards were always influenced by cost, production scalability, market demand, and technological capabilities. In the 1930s, when bowling shoes were first emerging as specialized items, cost-effectiveness was a dominant factor. The Great Depression meant that affordability was paramount for both proprietors purchasing rental shoes and individual bowlers buying their own. This naturally led to the use of readily available and inexpensive materials like split leather and basic wool felt for slide soles and rudimentary natural rubber for braking soles, manufacturing processes were relatively simple, relying on established shoemaking techniques. The lack of strict standards at this time also meant less investment in complex material testing or quality control, keeping production costs low. The focus was on volume and basic functionality. The wartime economy of the 1940s introduced a new set of economic constraints: scarcity. Manufacturers were forced to prioritize availability over optimal performance, often using whatever materials could be sourced. This led to a temporary stagnation in material innovation for bowling shoes, as resources were diverted to the war effort. However, this period also inadvertently spurred the development of synthetic materials, particularly synthetic rubber, which would prove economically and technically advantageous in the post-war era. The post-war boom of the 1950s revolutionized the economic landscape. With millions of new bowlers and booming demand, manufacturers were incentivized to invest in better materials and more efficient production methods. The sheer scale of the market allowed for economies of scale, making more advanced materials economically viable. While still focused on affordability, there was a growing segment of competitive bowlers willing to pay more for shoes that offered improved performance and consistency. This fueled the exploration of higher quality leathers, synthetic felts, and refined rubber compounds. The competition among shoe brands also spurred internal research and development, leading to proprietary material blends as a way to differentiate products. The 1960s and 1970s saw a continuous interplay between technological advancement and market demand. As material science progressed, the cost of producing sophisticated synthetic polymers like specialized felts and advanced rubber or polyurethane compounds began to decrease, making them accessible for mass production. Investment in specialized machinery for bonding, molding, and cutting these new materials became a necessity for manufacturers wanting to stay competitive. The shift towards more systematic testing, even if internal, represented an investment in quality control, which in turn helped reduce warranty claims and build brand reputation. This period also saw the increasing sophistication of marketing, with manufacturers highlighting the technology behind their sole materials, even if formal slip resistance ratings weren't publicly displayed. The idea that a shoe could enhance a bowler's game became a powerful selling point, justifying higher price points for premium models. By the 1980s, the bowling shoe market was segmenting. There were entry-level shoes, often rental shoes, where cost and durability were paramount, leading to the use of more robust, albeit perhaps less performance-tuned, synthetic materials. Then, there were mid-range and high-performance shoes for serious league and professional bowlers, where specialized microfiber slides and advanced polyurethane braking soles justified significantly higher prices. These premium shoes were the result of substantial investment in research, development, and advanced manufacturing processes, including precision molding, multi-layer sole construction, and rigorous quality assurance. The ability to source consistent, high-grade raw materials for these advanced synthetics became a critical aspect of the supply chain. The role of standardization, even if informally adopted by the industry, also had an economic dimension. Consistent sole performance meant fewer complaints from bowlers, less liability risk for alley owners due to falls, and a generally better experience, which contributed to the sport's overall health and profitability. While direct government regulation on bowling shoe slip resistance was never a significant factor, the collective effort of governing bodies like the American Bowling Congress and the Women's International Bowling Congress, alongside industry associations, encouraged manufacturers to adhere to unwritten but understood performance benchmarks. This facilitated fair competition and provided a level of assurance to consumers. Furthermore, the economic life cycle of a bowling shoe and its sole materials was a consideration. Manufacturers needed to balance the initial cost of materials and production with the expected lifespan of the shoe. A sole that wore out too quickly or lost its critical slip or grip characteristics after a short period would lead to customer dissatisfaction and hurt sales. Thus, durability and resistance to wear and tear became equally important, unseen parameters that influenced material selection alongside SCOF. The balance between performance, durability, and cost was a constant negotiation, driving the continuous, often subtle, evolution of sole material composition throughout these decades. This economic lens reveals that the unseen history was not just a matter of scientific purity, but also a pragmatic response to market forces and the pursuit of commercial success within a thriving recreational industry. While the history of bowling shoe sole material composition and slip resistance ratings in American recreational bowling from 1930 to 1990 may not feature explicit, universally mandated numerical ratings like those found on, for instance, automotive tires or appliances, the influence of governing bodies played a crucial, albeit often subtle and indirect role in shaping these developments. The American Bowling Congress and the Women's International Bowling Congress, along with various manufacturer associations, served as the primary conduits for discussions, recommendations, and eventually, the informal establishment of performance expectations. In the early decades, particularly from the 1930s through the 1950s, the concerns of these organizations were primarily focused on the protection of bowling equipment, fair play, and bowler safety. Issues like street shoes damaging approaches, inconsistent ball performance, and rudimentary lane conditions were at the forefront. While shoe soles were acknowledged as part of the overall equipment, their specific material composition and frictional properties were largely left to individual manufacturers. The ABC and WIBC, in their roles as rulemaking and sanctioning bodies, issued general guidelines. For example, they might prohibit shoes that left excessive marks on the approach, or those deemed overtly dangerous due to extreme slipperiness or stickiness. However, these were reactive measures rather than proactive specifications for sole materials or SCOF. As bowling's popularity surged in the 1950s and 1960s, and as the performance demands of competitive bowlers increased, the limitations of inconsistent equipment became more apparent. A bowler's performance could be significantly affected by the characteristics of their shoe soles, making it a matter of competitive fairness. Furthermore, safety concerns related to unexpected slips or falls due to unpredictable sole performance gained more attention. These issues began to prompt more detailed discussions within the technical committees of the ABC and WIBC. These committees, often composed of experienced bowlers, proprietors, and sometimes even engineers or chemists from equipment manufacturers, would evaluate new technologies and materials. While they did not typically issue direct specifications like all slide soles must have a kinetic SCOF between X and Y, they did discuss performance benchmarks. For instance, a new sole material that consistently caused falls or dramatically altered a bowler's slide might be deemed unacceptable in spirit, if not by explicit rule. Conversely, materials that offered improved consistency and safety would be informally encouraged. The influence of these bodies was often exerted through approved equipment lists or through discussions at industry conventions and technical seminars. While these lists primarily focused on balls, pins, and lanes, the underlying principles of fairness and safety extended to footwear. Manufacturers eager to maintain good standing within the bowling community and ensure their products were not implicitly or explicitly discouraged by influential organizations would pay close attention to these discussions. They would strive to produce shoes that met the unwritten but widely understood expectations for performance and safety. By the 1970s, and especially in the 1980s, as the science of tribology became more integrated into shoe design, the concept of a slip resistance rating became more formalized within the industry, even if not externally published by governing bodies as a mandatory numeric range. The ABC and WIBC were instrumental in fostering an environment where consistency and measurable performance were valued. They encouraged manufacturers to conduct rigorous testing and to produce shoes that performed predictably. While they didn't typically perform the tests themselves for shoe soles, their insistence on fair play indirectly drove manufacturers to adopt internal standards for COF and durability. The development of specific terminology around shoe performance, such as discussions of too much slide or not enough grip, began to coalesce into more standardized language within the industry. This enabled a more consistent dialogue between manufacturers, pro shop operators, and bowlers. Governing bodies sometimes sponsored or supported research into equipment performance, which, while not always directly leading to shoe sole specifications, contributed to the overall body of knowledge about how equipment interacts with the playing environment. The absence of a direct, mandated slip resistance rating for bowling shoes from these organizations, in contrast to some other athletic footwear or industrial safety standards, stemmed from several factors. Firstly, the ideal slip and grip characteristics could be somewhat subjective and dependent on individual bowler preference, technique, and lane conditions. Secondly, the technology for precisely measuring and uniformly enforcing such a rating across a diverse range of products and environments was complex. Instead, the ABC and WIBC generally relied on a more flexible approach, ensuring that products were safe, did not offer an unfair advantage, and contributed to the overall integrity of the sport. Their influence, therefore, was less about dictating specific material compositions or COF numbers, and more about subtly guiding the industry towards greater consistency, safety, and performance predictability through a combination of general rules, technical discussions, and encouragement of best practices among manufacturers. This subtle influence was nevertheless a critical component in the unseen history of how bowling shoe soles evolved to meet the demands of a rapidly professionalizing sport. The historical evolution of bowling shoe sole materials and slip resistance ratings was not solely about the intrinsic properties of the materials themselves or the methods of their measurement. A significant, yet often unseen aspect of this history involves the persistent challenge of environmental factors and the maintenance practices undertaken by bowlers and alley proprietors. Even the most meticulously engineered sole material, designed for a precise coefficient of friction, could have its performance drastically altered by the conditions of the approach surface, and these conditions were rarely perfectly static or uniform. From the earliest days of specialized bowling shoes in the 1930s through to the end of the 1980s, the primary environmental factors impacting sole performance remained largely consistent: dust, dirt, moisture, and, inadvertently, lane conditioner. Dust and dirt. Bowling alleys, despite their indoor setting, are not sterile environments. Microscopic dust particles, lint from clothing, hair, and other atmospheric debris, inevitably settle on the approach surface. When a bowling shoe sole, particularly a slide sole, contacts an approach laden with dust, the dust acts as a third-body lubricant, altering the coefficient of friction. A slide sole designed for a specific level of friction on a clean surface might become excessively slippery on a dusty one, leading to an uncontrolled slide or even a fall. Conversely, certain types of debris, especially stickier particulate matter, could temporarily increase friction. Manufacturers attempted to mitigate this by designing felt and microfiber soles with structures that could either resist particle adhesion or effectively clean themselves during the slide. However, the ultimate responsibility often fell to the bowler to regularly brush or wipe their slide sole to maintain its intended performance. Moisture. This was, and remains, one of the most unpredictable and potentially dangerous contaminants. Moisture could originate from several sources: humid ambient air leading to condensation on the approach, spills, whether water, soda, or beer, or even inadvertently tracked in moisture from restrooms. The effect of moisture on sole materials is complex. For absorbent materials like wool felt or natural leather, moisture absorption could significantly increase the sole's COF, causing an unexpected, abrupt stop. This grab effect was a major cause of falls and injuries. For rubber braking soles, moisture could sometimes reduce grip by creating a thin film that prevented direct material-to-surface contact, akin to hydroplaning. The development of synthetic felts with hydrophobic properties and specialized rubber compounds in the 1960s and 70s was a direct response to this challenge, aiming to create soles more resilient to moisture's unpredictable effects. Lane conditioner, or oil. While lane conditioner is intentionally applied to the first part of the bowling lane, it is not supposed to be present on the approach. However, it is an unavoidable reality that bowlers inadvertently track small amounts of oil from the lane onto the approach surface, particularly if they step over the foul line or handle a ball saturated with oil. Even a minute amount of lane oil on the approach can drastically reduce the coef of a slide sole, leading to an uncontrolled and dangerous slide. For braking soles, oil can severely compromise grip. This necessitated the practice of drying the soles, wiping them on a towel or a designated drying pad by bowlers before each shot. Manufacturers, while designing soles for consistency on a clean approach, also considered the material's tolerance for minor oil contamination, prioritizing materials that offered some degree of predictable performance, even if slightly compromised. Approach material wear and cleaning. The approaches themselves were subject to wear over time. Wooden approaches, in particular, could develop uneven spots, splinters, or areas where the finish had worn thin. Synthetic approaches, while more durable, could also develop slick spots from cleaning residues or prolonged wear. The cleaning methods employed by alley proprietors also played a critical role. Certain cleaning agents could leave residues that altered the friction of the approach, affecting shoe performance. Manufacturers and governing bodies encouraged best practices in approach maintenance to ensure a consistent and safe playing surface, recognizing that the shoe sole's performance was inextricably linked to the surface it interacted with. Bowler maintenance practices. Throughout these decades, bowlers themselves developed a range of personal maintenance practices to manage sole performance. Brushing or wiping. The most common practice was to brush or wipe the slide sole with a dedicated shoe brush or a clean towel before each shot to remove dust and debris. Powders or conditioners. In earlier decades, some bowlers would apply small amounts of talcum powder or specialized slide powders to their slide soles to reduce friction, especially if the approach felt sticky. This practice, while providing immediate relief, could also lead to inconsistent performance if overused, or if the powder accumulated unevenly. These additives were generally frowned upon by governing bodies due to their potential to contaminate the approach for other bowlers. Sole protection. Serious bowlers would often carry separate shoes for bowling, sometimes even carrying a dedicated slide shoe and a dedicated braking shoe, protecting their soles from outside contaminants until they were on the approach. Shoe covers were also used to prevent contamination when walking away from the approach area. The enduring challenge was to create sole materials that were inherently robust to these environmental variations, or at least provided a predictable response to them, while simultaneously educating bowlers and proprietors on best practices for maintenance. The unseen history of sole materials is therefore not just a story of polymer chemistry and friction coefficients, but also a testament to the continuous battle against the subtle yet powerful forces of environment and wear that constantly sought to undermine the carefully engineered performance of the bowling shoe. This constant interplay between material design and real-world conditions profoundly shaped the evolution of bowling shoe soles up to 1990 and beyond. While the primary focus of this detailed historical commentary has been the material composition and slip resistance ratings of the sole of the bowling shoe, it would be an incomplete picture without briefly addressing the complementary yet distinct evolution of the heel. The heel, while physically connected to the sole, often served different functional purposes and was composed of different materials, particularly for the slide foot, where it played a crucial role in the dynamics of the approach and release. In the earliest bowling shoes of the 1930s and 1940s, the heel was generally a simple extension of the sole material or a slightly harder, more durable variant. For the slide foot, if the sole was leather or felt, the heel often matched. For the braking foot, the heel would typically be a tougher rubber compound, providing additional grip and durability during the push-off and follow-through. These early heels were relatively low profile and primarily functioned as structural support and supplementary friction elements. As the understanding of the bowling approach dynamics advanced in the 1950s and 1960s, the specific function of the heel, especially on the slide foot, became more recognized. A controlled slide often begins with the heel making initial contact, followed by the midsole and then the ball of the foot. Therefore, the material of the heel needed to complement the slide sole, allowing for a smooth transition from heel strike to full foot slide. Slide heel materials. For the slide foot, leather heels were common, often made from a harder, more compressed leather than the sole itself to provide durability. Felt heels also appeared, offering a consistent glide with the felt sole. The challenge was to ensure the heel didn't grab prematurely or slide excessively, disrupting the bowler's balance. By the 1960s and 70s, some manufacturers began to use specific synthetic materials for slide heels, designed to offer a similar low-friction coefficient to the slide sole, ensuring a seamless motion. These could be specialized hard plastics, like high-density polyethylene or acetal, or certain very dense, smooth rubber compounds. The aim was to provide a consistent, low-friction initial contact point. Braking heel materials. For the braking foot, the heel was invariably made of a durable, high-friction material. Rubber compounds, similar to those used in the braking sole, SBR, later polyurethane, were standard. The heel provided additional stability and braking power during the critical push-off phase and could absorb some of the impact. The design often incorporated a distinct heel pad, sometimes with a slightly different compound or hardness from the main sole, to optimize grip and wear resistance. The construction of the heel also evolved. In earlier shoes, the heel might have been simply tacked or stitched onto the upper and sole. By the 1960s and 70s, more sophisticated bonding techniques were employed, using strong industrial adhesives to permanently attach the heel to the sole and upper, enhancing durability and structural integrity. The height and contour of the heel were also subject to design considerations, aiming to provide ergonomic support and optimal weight distribution during the approach. Some bowlers preferred a slightly higher heel for certain aspects of their delivery, influencing design variations. The interaction between the heel and the approach was also a factor in slip resistance. An overly grippy slide heel could cause an abrupt deceleration early in the approach, while a braking heel that wore unevenly could compromise the stability of the push-off. Therefore, the selection of heel materials, like sole materials, was driven by a quest for consistency, durability, and a predictable coefficient of friction relevant to its specific function. By the 1980s, the heel on high-performance bowling shoes was an integral engineered component. On the slide shoe, it typically consisted of a durable, low-friction synthetic or treated leather, designed to initiate the slide smoothly. On the braking shoe, it was a robust, high-friction rubber or polyurethane compound, engineered for maximum stopping power and longevity. While often overlooked in discussions focused on the broad expanse of the sole, the heel's quiet, yet critical role in the overall slip resistance and functional performance of the bowling shoe was a testament to the comprehensive material engineering that characterized this era of bowling footwear development. It demonstrates that every contact point between the shoe and the approach was subject to rigorous material selection and design scrutiny, all in the service of the bowler's precision and safety. As the American recreational bowling landscape transitioned from the 1980s towards the cusp of the 1990s, the evolution of standardized bowling shoe sole material composition and slip resistance ratings had reached a plateau of sophistication within the historical period under examination. By 1990, the bowling shoe was firmly established as a highly engineered piece of athletic equipment, a far cry from the rudimentary footwear of the 1930s. The advancements made in sole material science, manufacturing processes, and the internal, industry-wide understanding of slip resistance had laid a robust foundation for what would come next. The legacy of the 1930 to 1990 period was the establishment of core principles and material choices that continue to influence bowling shoe design even today. The asymmetrical sole design with a low-friction slide material on one foot and a high-friction braking material on the other was universally adopted and refined. The materials themselves, advanced synthetic felts, microfibers, chrome-tanned leathers for slide soles, and high-performance SBR and polyurethane compounds for braking soles, had become industry standards, recognized for their specific characteristics and consistent performance. The concept of a coefficient of friction as a critical, measurable parameter, though still primarily an internal benchmark for manufacturers rather than an externally published rating for consumers, had become deeply ingrained in the product development cycle. Manufacturers had sophisticated internal testing protocols, ensuring that their soles met specific performance criteria for both initial slip or grip and durability over time. Quality control measures had matured, ensuring consistency across production batches, which was paramount for competitive fairness and bowler trust. The understanding of how environmental factors like dust, moisture, and lane oil residue impacted sole performance was also well established. This led to continued efforts in material innovation to make soles more resilient to these variables, and to the ongoing emphasis on bowler maintenance practices. The symbiotic relationship between the shoe's sole and the approach surface was fully recognized, driving the ongoing dialogue between equipment manufacturers, lane manufacturers, and bowling proprietors. As the industry approached 1990, the foundation was also being set for the next wave of innovations, particularly in customization. While not yet widespread within the 1930 to 1990 scope, the idea of interchangeable sole systems, where bowlers could select different slide materials or braking heels to fine-tune their approach for varying lane conditions, began to emerge in discussions and early prototypes. This was a natural progression from the highly specialized material science of the preceding decades, offering bowlers an unprecedented level of control over their shoes' frictional properties. The detailed understanding of individual material SCOF values, painstakingly developed through the years, made such interchangeable systems conceptually possible. Furthermore, the materials science itself continued to advance. The constant research into new polymers, composites, and textile technologies meant that even more precise and durable sole materials were on the horizon. The quest for the perfect balance of slide and grip, a balance that could adapt to an ever-evolving sport, was ongoing. The insights gained from decades of experimentation with natural and synthetic materials, from rudimentary leather to advanced microfibers and polyurethanes, provided the critical knowledge base. In summary, the period from 1930 to 1990 represents a comprehensive journey from basic necessity to scientific precision in the realm of bowling shoe sole materials. It was a history characterized by material experimentation, the slow but steady embrace of scientific measurement, the quiet influence of governing bodies, and the constant negotiation between performance, durability, and economic viability. The unseen history of these soles is a testament to the meticulous detail and continuous improvement that underlies even the most seemingly mundane aspects of recreational sports equipment, ensuring that the simple act of rolling a ball down a lane could be performed with increasing confidence, consistency, and precision for millions of Americans. The advancements forged during these 6 decades laid the enduring groundwork for every slide and every push-off that has happened on a bowling approach since. A quiet, yet profound legacy of material engineering.